Hi, and welcome back to another episode of Charity Questions. And this is our 5th episode. And today we've got Ken Burnett, a master storyteller and the author of one of my favorite books, Storytelling Can Change the World. So really excited to have you here today, Ken. Hi.
Good morning. Great to see you, George. I'm delighted and honored to be here today. Fantastic.
Lovely. And so you know that this is the podcast where we take the questions from the charity sector and direct them to different people, whether it's fundraising, management, governance, whatever it might be. And so actually for a new twist, we're going to kick off with a question that Ken asked me to ask. And I didn't know this, but Ken has a long history of working with DSC and especially our founder, Michael Norton. So Ken, kick us off. What was that like working with DSC in the early stages? And tell us a little bit.
Well, it was fantastic because Michael and Hilary were starting the DSC roughly around the same time that I came into the sector, and I was working particularly with the organisation that became ActionAid. And Michael lived not too far away from me, so we met up. He was a fantastic influence in my professional life because I lacked confidence, I think, in those days. And I was in a new area. I was also quite young. I was 26 years old. And Michael was very keen on professionalizing the sector and sharing knowledge and information. And he said to me, well, because I came from a publishing background and a sales environment.
Yeah.
And he said to me, you've got quite a lot that you could teach to what was then, there was no profession of fundraising as such. There was no institute. There was nothing like that around. And in fact, Directory of Social Change was one of the first great resources for the sector.
Yeah.
Michael and I put on some joint events together. We worked in really quite amazingly dingy church halls, and Michael, we used to kind of spar a little bit about how to do these things, because Michael would say, well, we've got to do these things as cheaply as possible because they're charities, they don't have budgets, they don't have money. And in those days, that was absolutely true. But I would say to him, look, well, the thing is that they're going to give a day of their time. We ought to at least make sure that our basic human comforts like toilets and things like that. Michael wanted to keep the costs down as low as possible, and so sometimes we were in fairly primitive surroundings. But we put on some events, and Michael encouraged me to be a speaker, and then he encouraged me to edit a book, which was the first book that I published, which was called Advertising by Charities. I think it's long out of print.
I've not heard of it, Ken. Sorry.
Okay. Well, I was editor, but I also contributed a couple of chapters to it. And
awesome.
It was based on one of the seminars that Michael and I organised, where a whole lot of people came in and they each contributed a chapter to this book. And then at the time I was starting my business and I was working on particularly charity annual reports. And so I wrote a book called Charity Annual Reports, very much driven by Michael and published by the Directory of Social Change. So I think I can honestly say that if it hadn't been for Michael's encouragement, I probably would not have gone down the path that I've gone, particularly as an author. And curiously, there's a kind of 25 years later or so, I was the chair of judges for the Professional Fundraising Awards, and we were looking for somebody to give a Lifetime Achievement Award to, and it was an award that I'd received myself, and I thought, well, somebody who really deserves this is Michael Norton.
Absolutely.
And his name was put forward to the committee, and we decided that he would be a very worthy recipient. So that was probably 15 years ago or so. But I felt it was a little tiny bit of an opportunity for me to thank a giant of the sector who has been very influential towards me.
Absolutely. That's really nice, and it's nice to know you have that history with DSC, and we're certainly thankful for that, definitely.
Yeah, no, it was good. It was great. Yeah.
Really nice, yeah. And so for those that don't know, I said it earlier, Michael Norton's one of the founders of DSC. I guess I say 45 years, but that was when I joined, so it's a little bit more than that now.
Yeah,
A long history.
yeah, right. Very early days it was.
Absolutely. So you've gone on to, as you say, become an author, and one of the most famous books that I know that you've written is Storytelling Can Change the World, and it certainly changed the way I saw the world. One of my colleagues at DSC, Gabby, she's asked, do you remember the story that changed the world for you?
Okay, well, I find that a great question, but a really difficult one to answer, because there are so many stories that are so influential, and to me stories go right back to my early childhood, and they were very formative things, so I was a great follower of the Greek myths, and read avidly Homer's the Iliad and the Odyssey, and things like that. So things like that. I was never very good at school. School didn't like me, and I didn't like school. I spent most of my time looking out the window and wishing that I was somewhere else. But every now and then, the teachers, instead of presenting us with dull, boring facts and heavy information, they would tell a story. I mean, the obvious ones are like, Archimedes and his eureka moment, and Isaac Newton and the apple and things like that. And I would sit up and pay attention. And it was the stories that stuck with me. Robert the Bruce and the Spider and things like that. And I again at the time I was a big fan of sort of ripping yarns for youngsters like King Solomon's Mines and things like that. So they all made a huge influence upon me and my character, but there was no single story. I think this was and they are, stories are all around us, and stories connect people, and they are what interests people. And so it's really hard to sort of separate stories from the formative nature of our characters. But one particular story does stand out for me as a great influence in my professional life, was what I call the Swedish Story. And this is a story which is actually told in my book. I won't tell it now, but I used it to open conferences. It's a story that evolved from the very first time that I left the shores of Britain to speak to an audience in another country. I went to Stockholm in Sweden. And it's a great opening story. It's very funny. It's humor that works in any language or any culture. And it's been priceless to me, really priceless. I've probably, all around the world, in probably 30 plus countries, I've used that story as an opening.
Like that.
And it's also one which enables me to sort of parody the British tendency to rely on everybody speaking English.
Absolutely.
Which I feel quite self-conscious about. So that's probably the best answer. I mean, the other story that really changed my life was a story called The Worst Tourist, which involved me being in Africa and seeing a young boy dying from AIDS. And I don't come out of that story at all well, but maybe that'll come up later in conversations. But that was and there's lots and lots of stories that it was the real, when I started writing that book in about 6-7 years ago, I realized that I had spent most of my life telling stories, and it's what we do. I was a direct mail copywriter for most of my career. When I ran my agency, my bit was writing. And that's all about telling stories.
Absolutely. Yeah. So you're absolutely right. Story is so important. We're so ingrained into what we do as humans, isn't it? And I guess we're also persuading people through storytelling. We're trying to help them to see something in a new way. And can you think of a time where you've told a story that maybe you thought was going to land well, or potentially a story you were testing the water with, and potentially it didn't go down very well, or you had difficulty persuading people through that story?
Yeah, I don't know if I've got any specific instance. I do know that when I started doing seminars, again supported by Michael,
Yeah.
I often, I would often be nervous, and I would often, be less than perfect in my storytelling. But I actually learned quite early on that you don't have to be perfect. I mean, I'm a great believer anybody can tell a story. You don't have to be a great novelist to tell a story. As long as you tell your story with power and passion, and it's authentic and it's you, then the story will work. And so actually, falling flat on your face is not the worst thing that can happen for a storyteller. I think, I can't think of any particular instance where I've died on my feet, but in my early seminars, I certainly did quite often. So much so that I got quite used to it.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I guess story can come organically, but for you as an expert storyteller, one of my colleagues, Dean, he's asking, do you use any practical tools to guide you through the process of storytelling?
Yeah, I thought that was quite an interesting question. I don't know if I use any. I mean, I use my hands.
Yeah,
like an Italian newsreader. I start off kind of quite restrained, and then before long, I'm all over the place. So yeah, I'm expressive. I try to stand up when I stand up when I tell a story, and I try to use my body language, because I think that's a major part of the impact of a story. Is
absolutely
how it's told. So I use my expressions, and I use my emotions. I try to breathe in a particular way. But I mean, the real keys that you need to have knowledge and experience, and you need to have authenticity, and you need to just be very clear about where your story is going. You need to be absolutely enthusiastic and committed to the story. I think also in the process, you're looking to take people from perhaps total disinterest, or you've got to engage people and then take them right through a spectrum of stages until they feel they must, you're galvanizing them to action. You're saying, let us invade Byzantium. That's the kind of thing. So I think that going from engagement through involvement to interesting to inspiration to action, these are all important stages that we need to take people through in our storytelling.
I love that. So you said engagement, involvement, inspiration, and action. That's
well, I think and probably somewhere in there you would add influence. So I think it's engagement, involvement, inspiration, influence, and action. Those are the 5 kind of stages of the story. That's what you're looking to do.
Yeah.
Now, I feel the more that you reduce this to a process, the less likely it is to work. So again, it has to be authentic, and it starts off with that. But if you have the knowledge and the experience, and you have the passion and the enthusiasm, then those things will come through. And storytelling is a natural process. I don't think we gain a lot by trying to copy other people. So I say, if you see a great storyteller like Alan Clayton or Bernard Ross, or any of these kind of guru type public speakers, Tony Ellisher was a great example. I don't think it helps to try and be like them. I think you have to be like you.
I like that you said you've got the knowledge and the experience on one side, and then you've also got the passion on the other side. And I think when I talk to CEOs and small charities, and they're looking for people to help them with their fundraising, for example, but they have the passion, they just don't think they have the knowledge. And if you had to have one of those as your starting point, let's say you could only have the knowledge of storytelling or the passion for the cause, which one would you choose to have, and which one do you think is easier to pick up?
Well, I just don't think you can get anywhere without the passionate belief. It's my mantra is in our sector we have the best stories in the world to tell.
Yeah, we do.
Best reasons for telling them well.
Absolutely.
So but you have to tell them with power and passion that will move people to action. That's for me encapsulates it. The knowledge and experience can come later, but I will say, George, that when I was a young fundraiser in ActionAid, I spent a year trying to learn what it involved being a fundraiser.
Mm.
And then after that year, I was sent to Africa.
Mm-hmm.
And I visited Kenya and Burundi in Central Africa. And I went into the wildest of places, and I went to places where tourists just can't go. And I saw things. And, I find in Africa, stories kind of jump out from behind the trees, jump out at you. And, I just came back from that so fired up. I think my capacity to be a great fundraiser multiplied 100-fold because of that experience. And I would counsel, there are so many false economies in the not-for-profit sector. So I would counsel charities to invest in making sure that their fundraisers are really steeped in the cause, and that they fully get the nuances and the experiences, and they meet the people and they listen to the voices. And to be a great storyteller, you've got to be a good listener.
Absolutely, yeah. And sometimes it is about that in the sector, isn't it? How can we get our beneficiaries' voices out there in a more creative way?
Yeah, well, I think that's a great point. Yeah.
Yeah. So when we are delivering storytelling, and of course there's so many different people in the world, and everybody is unique, and we all have kind of our own interpretations. And do you do anything when you're thinking about different groups of people, different generations potentially, to try and apply your stories in those ways?
I would hate to think that people, I'm now of an older generation. In my twilight years, I would hate to think that people were kind of censoring their stories because I was, they were talking to an older audience. And, we as fundraisers, obviously, we do recognize that donors tend to be, middle class, relatively affluent, comfortably off, and usually retired, and of a certain age.
Absolutely, yeah.
But if you listen to songs or you watch movies, songs and movies are not. You don't get different editions for different age groups. I think we tell the story.
Yeah.
And the essence of the story will be universal. And I would not pull my punches for different audiences. Well, possibly for children, you have to think of different devices to draw them in.
Yeah.
You're in real danger of patronizing people.
Yeah.
If you put them into boxes. I have not consciously structured my stories. What you do need to do, George, is treat your audience with respect.
Absolutely.
You need to give them good. You need to give them good grammar, good diction. You need to give them empathy and sensitivity that are necessary qualities for a storyteller. I do not think this is an easy task.
Agreed. Yeah.
But the more natural you can be, the better. And the more you try to complicate it, the more holes you will dig for yourself to fall into. So, I don't think we need to be different in dealing with different generations fundraisers.
I love that you said empathy and sensitivity, because when I'm training, I'm always like, we want to make our funders cry. Whereas you said that so much nicer than I said it. And it's always, when I was learning to fundraise a number of years ago and going on courses, I talked to the trainers, and a lot of the trainers work for DSC as associates. And I would say, what is your favorite book? And I would always expect them to say, well, it's the Writing Better Fundraising Applications book. Of course it is. But every single time, Ken, they come back to this. They come back to your book and storytelling, and it is about getting the structure right. Of course, you've got to have your accounts right.
That's lovely, George. I think that's fantastic. I would love, I love
Absolutely.
To hear that.
Yeah, and so everyone comes back to it.
We do have a few copies left, actually. So hopefully people will get their own. And of course, my most recent book is also available from DSC.
Absolutely, yes.
Of campaigning fundraising.
Definitely. And so I was really attracted to this early on in fundraising, and very lucky to be well trained and know how valuable story is. And as someone who reads a lot of bids, I will read a bid sometimes and I'll think there's just nothing in here that gives me the beneficiary's voice. And for you, what role does story play in fundraising?
Well, I mean, I think you cannot take stories out of fundraising. To me, fundraising is essentially the communication of inspiration. We're in the inspiration business. We're not in the business of raising money.
Absolutely.
Because money is the end product of what we do. It is not the means. And this is where, look at the Olive Cook fiasco and the media attacks on inappropriate fundraising methods. Relentless persuasion, aggressive fundraising, which has no place in modern fundraising. And, so I hope we're entering post-Olive Cook a new era of responsible fundraising. And it is the story that is at the heart of this, because I remember going to Australia shortly after Relationship Fundraising, my first and best-selling book was published. Not my first big book. It wasn't my first book. It was my first sort of big success.
Of course, yeah.
And this guy said to me, "Oh, of course, fundraising is just another kind of selling." And I said to him, I think you could not be more wrong. We are not in the business of persuading people to do something they don't want to do. We are in the business of inspiring people. So I think that you cannot take storytelling out of fundraising, not in any way at all. And you were talking about your beneficiaries. Mostly what fundraising organizations do is they talk about themselves and their organization. Look at charity annual reports.
Yeah.
You will see the chief executive's report, the chairman of trustees report, the head of finances report. And, you lose the will to live before you're halfway, even their mothers wouldn't read these stories. They're not stories. They tend to be, reports and statistically based things.
It's almost a throwback to whoever started this kind of process. There is a need to creatively change them up, isn't there? Absolutely.
Yeah. But we don't engage people by talking about ourselves. And what a great organization we are. I mean, look at our government today. All they can do is they're catastrophically inept, but they spend all their time trying to say how great they are. Yeah. We have tended to do fall into that same kind of trap as a sector. And for me, it's about getting your beneficiaries engaged, giving them a chance to talk. Now, every time I have been involved in persuading organizations that I've worked with to do that kind of thing, it's not difficult to get beneficiaries to step up and tell their story. They want to tell their story, particularly if they've not been very well treated, or they've they feel hard done by, or whatever. So let your beneficiaries talk and listen to what they are what they're saying to, and what they can tell you about the difference that has been made in their lives by the interventions of organizations like yours. And if you give them space and places to tell their stories, then they will absolutely do that, and they will come forward. As you say, you see so many kind of cases for support, which are so bland and formulaic. They look like a UN document. Nobody's going to read that. You cannot bore people supporting your cause. You have to reach out, and it's hard. It's a noisy environment. There's what is that? I can't remember how many different messages our average reader is exposed to in the average day. We have got to get our message.
Absolutely.
Break into their busy lives. And that takes some doing. So, going back to an earlier point, the core of fundraising is communication, and the core of communication is telling a good story with power and passion, and telling that story well. So fundraising, I believe, is the truth told well. The truth told well, as far as I'm aware of that phrase, started life as the slogan of an advertising agency. It was the
truth told well. Okay.
The truth told well.
I like it.
Now, advertising agencies, as you know, George, are professional liars. So to have a slogan of the truth told well, that really pissed me off. I'm sorry, with my language, but that really did. Because why should they? But that's our territory. We should set out to tell the truth as well as we possibly can. Now, what this means for our organizations is that we have to train people. And we have to train people to do this properly, and we have to invest in that training. So going back to sending the young fundraiser to Kenya and Burundi, that takes quite an investment.
Absolutely.
And charities are, normally the investment, the I word, has them running for the hills because they, it's anathema to them. They can't get their head round. Even the people who are captains of industry, who know the power and necessity of investment in their commercial enterprises, they don't get it in charities. But we have to invest in people. We have to train people properly. We have to recruit storytellers. I'm often, not so much nowadays, but I used to often sit on selection boards for directors of fundraising, or I would be invited in to meet the candidate and give an opinion. And I would often say, why are you even looking at this person? They're not a natural fundraiser, because they're not likable, they're not approachable, they're not, they don't have empathy, they don't and I'm sorry, but there's far too much of that in the current leadership. We need new, much bolder leadership that will make sure that we have the right people, give them the right tools and equipment, so that they are fully able to go out and inspire the world. Fundraising at the moment is generally looked down on. This was basically the motive. I swore I would never write another fundraising book, but when I came to do the essence of campaigning fundraising, it really focuses on the fact that we should be, we have got so much more to offer, and you cannot separate the fundraising element from the campaigning. People don't give you money for things to stay the same. There is always a campaigning element. Absolutely. But fundraising sounds as if it's all about money, and it's not. It's about work that needs doing. It's about changes that people want to see, and our job is to facilitate that. Absolutely. Storytelling is the most powerful tool we have at our disposal.
Can you tell me about one of your campaigns then? Maybe pick one out from your career where storytelling's had a profound effect. I can think of some from the book, but I'll let you.
Okay. Well, first of all, I think I would say, you have to accept that fundraising is an emotional business. You cannot take emotion out of fundraising. It's inevitably emotional, and it's foolish to try. So, the building of the passion into fundraising is absolutely first and foremost. And I used to have to do that for a lot of different organizations, because during the 80s and 90s, I was working with my own agency, Burnett Associates, and we worked with many of the big charities in the land, and we produced some really, really memorable cases and case histories, and some of the best fundraising from around the world. So I think that I could give a lot of different examples.
Pick one.
Greenpeace was an organization that we worked a lot with. We did some amazingly good campaigns with them. The most recent organization that I've been working is with the National Youth Orchestra. And they have, basically their stories are the stories of young, aspiring musicians and the hurdles that are often in the way that prevent people. And their audience is predominantly classic donor profile, probably slightly older, but people who love music, and which is actually most people. Most people love classical music. And so it's a universal story. And they tell theirs that they have only been fundraising since 2016. And they've built up a donor file over the last couple of years, which is very impressive. And it's, they're recruiting supporters at kind of costs that most people would die to achieve. And they're getting the kind of feedback from their supporters, which is so powerful and so effective. But in terms of actual campaigns, a campaign that inspired me, which I write about in the book, in fact, it forms the preface of storytelling, is the Amnesty North Korea ads that I worked on with Indra Sinha.
Absolutely.
And the campaign that led up to that is was the Amnesty's long copy, full-page press advertisements from the 1990s that were always written by Indra Sinha, who's an author and, in my view, the best fundraising copywriter who's still active. He and I are about the same age, actually, so we're both in our declining years. But we the sheer act of telling the story of the North Korean death camps and the hardship and deprivation that was inflicted upon the people who were unfortunate enough to find themselves in those camps. That's very powerful fundraising stuff that will shake people over their breakfasts. But again, Indra Sinha broke all the rules of advertising by writing long headlines, by exceptionally long copy ads, telling a story. And it was the unfolding of the layers of the story that actually, and I quote him, and I use his writing as an example a lot in the book, because I think he kind of instinctively understood the role of the fundraising copywriter. And in something like that, where you are looking to appeal to the emotions of your readers, and you can't create emotions. Emotions are there; they just are. But you can stimulate them. So in those ads, it was the compassion, it was the anger that these things could be done, and the desire to do something in a seemingly hopeless situation. And in fact, I cite in those Amnesty ads that one of their most effective ads was when they said, we have failed. We failed to make a difference. And it's because we failed that we need you to support us, because we must try again, because we cannot allow this to go on. And I thought that was exceptionally powerful and effective. Honest and in fact, it was brilliant for Amnesty, because in those days, Amnesty was recruiting donors off the page at a profit. Almost unheard of.
Because of this story, or pre that story as well? Because of that story, or
this was because of the campaign in the 90s that that had supervised, and there was these ads are all, by the way, showcased on Sophie, and they're explained and dissected in some detail on Sophie, because I think that just looking at these ads is a masterclass in fundraising copywriting. And any fundraiser, and I meet lots of them, who doesn't know about this kind of history and tradition within the fundraising sector. And this was why we set up Sophie 15 years ago, the Showcase of Fundraising Innovation and Inspiration, as a free resource for charities, so that they could look at the best of what works in fundraising and copy it. We want people to learn from it, but the leadership within our organizations has got to recognize that they have the duty to evolve and make possible and fund the learning that people need to have to be an effective fundraising storyteller.
Yeah, and in some cases, just to start themselves as well, if that is their role in the charity.
Which, of course, includes their buying a copy of my book for every fundraiser in their organization.
I mean, we would back this up 100%. Of course.
Not that I have any vested interest in this.
No, and I do joke, but the book has been vitally important for me, and just one of the pages I'll pick out is just a whole page of emotive language and emotive words you can use, and that is just a resource I come back to all the time. Yeah.
Well, it's I think the words we use are really important, and I talk a bit in the book about bad language and terms like lapsed donor and acquisition and development and retention. I mean, do you want to be acquired by a charity? Would you want to live next door to a lapsed donor? I mean, it sounds like a fallen woman. It sounds biblical, but so I, again, going back to Michael and the early days of my seminars, I have always imagined that the back two rows of this hopefully packed conference hall will be full of donors, and they will be looking on and listening to what I'm saying. Absolutely. And if I say anything that's offensive to donors, then they will let me know about it fairly quickly. I focus on the donor experience. I believe if giving is a good experience, donors will do more of it. If it's not a good experience, they'll fairly quickly stop. And if we use language which is inappropriate, which our organizations do all the time,
absolutely.
I mean, even referring to people as high net worth individuals and low-level donors, and middle level donors and things
major
like that.
Donors,
Major donors, that's right. I mean, I wouldn't mind being a major donor, but I certainly don't like to be thought of as a middle level or a low level donor. That's fairly demeaning. So it's thinking about how your words are being received, and this, I think, is hugely important for fundraisers.
I love that.
We should focus on getting our language right, because it's so important. And yet, unfortunately, the opposite is happening in organizations. People pay less attention. You will not be told off if your grammar is poor. And yet, if you're writing to mainly older donors, you will find that an awful lot of them notice things like that. they won't let it stop them from supporting the cause.
Yeah.
It may spoil the experience for them, and that's unforgivable.
Yeah, and Ray Locke, the ex-CEO of Forces in Mind Trust, he said it was his number one bugbear when reading bids is grammar. And that's
I've often heard that from trust and people in trusts and foundations, that they are dismayed by the poor quality of writing.
Okay, so a question then that I want to ask, and I have an answer for it myself, but I want to ask you, Ken. So do emojis have a role in language in the future of storytelling?
Well, I use emojis myself.
That's what I wanted to hear.
Well, they can be quite fun. But I also tell jokes, and I try and make things light-hearted. But I think fundraisers need to be quite careful, because humor can be quite risky in fundraising. Some things that will appeal to one part of your audience may not appeal to the other. I think if you have honesty, sincerity, integrity, and you treat people with respect, then you can use things like that in a light-hearted way, and it will it'll certainly not be a disadvantage. It may even be an advantage. We do not. Somewhere in our distant past, somebody drove us along the line of copying big business. We should not be copying big business. We should not be talking about organizations. A movement is much more powerful than an organization.
I like that.
I think we should look like we're here to change the world. I don't believe we should be dressing up in suits and ties and trying to look like we're
FTSE 100,
Aviva Insurance, or
pitching to shareholders.
or we're pitching to shareholders. Yes, let's talk about our stakeholders. But let's do it as the I think we have to be very focused. We have to there's no less professionalism in our sector, but we do not want to wear the clothes of big business. But we should be looking to be distinctive. We're not the not-for-profit sector. I hate that, because it talks about what we're not. We are the for change.
For change.
And we are professional people with appropriate skills, with a great deal of integrity, we are fully respectful. We are actually able to convince our supporters that thing is good for them. And this, George, this is the most untapped treasure for our sector, is the fact that behavioral scientists are now increasingly able to show that giving is good for you. It's good for your mental health. It's good for your marriage. You live longer. There's all sorts of things. And I now, if ever I'm giving a talk, I focus quite a lot on this, because the sector has never made enough of it. And this should be a mutual thing. It should be people should enjoy our communications, because they're getting such good stories. They're being involved in such a way. They're being shown that they can make a practical, meaningful difference in people's lives. And we should allow them to drive the process. We should not be trying to channel or persuade or all of those things. So I think we need a rethink, and that's what I've put into the essence of campaigning fundraising.
Like that,
and it's not going to be me and my generation that's going to bring about this change. It's going to be young folk like you, George, and your colleagues.
I'll take that. Yeah.
And actually, to me, it's the biggest cause of optimism as I approach my declining years, is that actually I see the potential in the coming generation of fundraising leaders.
I agree.
I hope that the conservative, small c conservative, heads down, risk averse aspects of the not-for-profit sector, I hope they will move aside create the environment in which this new leadership can thrive and deliver. Well, because I think we could be doing much, much more. We could be much more important in people's lives, and we could be much more respected, and we could be reaching a lot more people than we do. And one thing that will help is the power of storytelling.
Yeah, absolutely. I've written down the word movement there in terms of instead of organizations. And I think when you talk about younger people, potentially that links to social media and people who off their own back, no governance structure, no charity commission registration, post their thoughts and feelings and their stories on Instagram and Twitter and get a big following and cause change.
I have to say, social media came along at a time when I was already, set in my ways. But, and I mean, I try to make sense of Facebook and Twitter and all of those things. But I actually, there is so much bad negativity. There's so much aggression and dishonesty.
True.
We need to counter that. And we need to counter it with, kindness is a word that I think we should focus a little bit more on. Look at our political discourse today; it's appalling, and and we are led by. I better not go there because but
you don't need to. Yeah,
like integrity, competence, honesty. These things are in short supply. Now, this is a space in which our sector, the For Change sector, can occupy. We can move into this, and we've got the stories, we've got the achievements, we've got the warm glow, we've got all the things that should help us to make that happen. And I think the next 15, 20 years should be very, very interesting for the not-for. This is a great time to be a fundraiser. Yeah. And I shall possibly not get to that promised land, but I am going to be up at the top of the hill watching. And I think it's going to be great. I
agree. And I mean, if you believe in generational theory, this was meant to happen. We were meant to reform at this point every 90 years or so. So potentially this is the right time for it.
It's excellent, George. Well, we should have a beer together and talk more about that.
I would love to. So one of the things you wrote in your book that when sometimes you read something and you think that is so important, I'm never going to forget that, and it's happened a few times recently. Your book was one of those, and you say that change can only occur whenever there is a good crisis or a good story, and that makes so much sense instantly to me. Obviously, we've just had a pretty epic crisis with COVID. I think we're still on this journey, aren't we? How else could charities be capitalizing on the COVID crisis? Could they be either talking more about the crisis or could they be capitalizing on stories? What do you think?
Well, okay, that's interesting. Well, first of all, I'm delighted to hear that I said something as wise as that. I don't recall saying it, but I'm glad to hear that I did. So, yeah, I mean, I do think we are still deep in the COVID crisis. And that sort of throws everything up in the air and kind of rules go out of the window. But I mean, I had a very dramatic. I was traveling in Australia and New Zealand, lecturing for the Fundraising Institute of Australia and the Fundraising Institute of New Zealand. And I was one of the last people out of New Zealand. So I saw kind of the actions that were being taken in February of 2020, and I saw how ineptly our country responded and how many people died directly as a result of that. So it was in a time of short-sightedness. The thing about the charity sector at that time was there seemed to be two basic different approaches that people could make to a pandemic crisis, which wasn't exactly unheard of or unforeseen by those people who spend their time projecting the future. And the first of those was to heads down, cancel everything. It's going to be disastrous for fundraisers. Let's put all our staff on furlough. including the fundraising staff.
Yeah.
Now, to me, the clue is in the name. If you're going to need money, where is the sense in putting your staff on furlough? So I thought that was incredibly short-sighted. So in Sophie, we've run a series which was all focused on the positivity of fundraising during the pandemic, because most of the donor classes, if there is a donor class, were not hard up. They were not losing their jobs. They in fact were in the opposite situation. They had money to spend and they wanted to be doing something. They wanted to be doing something about this crisis. And so we've run a series of features based on fundraisers around the world, giving us information on the success of campaigns among those charities who are donor focused, who are living the new age of responsible fundraising, who are kind of relationship fundraisers at heart, who are delivering the good donor experience. Absolutely. And they were incredibly successful, and they reported things like, it's like Christmas all year round. This was in the middle of the summer of 2020. In fact, then we followed up 6 months later, and these organizations were still getting good results. And if you follow Mark Phillips of Blue Frog and you listen to what they have been doing in terms of their research, and if you don't follow Mark Phillips, you're not serious about fundraising. If you don't follow what Mark Phillips is saying, you're just not in the game.
Nice.
They are showing incredibly positive results. So I think the COVID pandemic is an appalling example of the short-sightedness of fundraising charities. What we need to do now is recognize that the market for something to believe in is infinite, and donors will support that. So we need to get out there and tell our stories with the power and passion that will move people to action. And we do not want to be holding back. This is a time, it is a time of crisis. I cite the Sarti story. I don't know if this is in my book or not. I can't remember.
I know, yeah.
For a while. But there's a film in the 1960s called Grand Prix with, I can't remember. Anyway, Yves Montand plays a French racing driver called Sarti. And Sarti, his tactic, he won a lot of races because his tactic was that almost always in a Grand Prix race, there's a moment of confusion. Perhaps the rain is coming down, the track's very slippery, a car goes into a skid, they're belting along at 180 miles an hour, and there's complete confusion. At that moment, Sarti, most drivers would slow down. And wait to see what's happening ahead of them. That's the moment where Sarti hits the accelerator. He puts his foot down and he goes right through. Now, it's a highly risky strategy, but that's how you win races. Now, I think there are so many Sarti moments, and COVID was a Sarti moment, where fundraisers should have hit the accelerator. Instead of cutting back on fundraising, that was the wrong move. And the evidence of that now is unchallengeable. Anybody who thinks otherwise has either not been communicating properly with their supporters or is unaware of what's been going on.
Absolutely.
Because there's plenty of evidence of that.
I love that. So that is very reminiscent in my own thoughts. I think that's really nice. And you are so quotable, Ken. You said market for something to believe in is infinite. It's lovely. Well,
that's actually, I'm quoting somebody else.
Oh, okay.
A guy called Hugh MacLeod. I am very influenced by an American website called The Gaping Void. And Hugh MacLeod and you know, I've often worried. I've spent much of my time in marketing.
Mm.
I ran a marketing agency for 20 years,
Yeah.
and I've never met a donor who wants to be marketed at.
Mm.
I think we are in a marketplace,
Yeah.
obviously, and it is the market for something to believe in.
Mm.
And the beauty is that that market is infinite. And that's why during recessions, and I've been through a few in my 43 years as a fundraiser, the fundraising does well at times of difficulty. And so we need to recognize that the market for what we do is infinite. And we need to stop marketing at people.
Absolutely.
They don't like it.
Absolutely. Amazing, and that was such an interesting deep dive into storytelling. And what I want to do now, Ken, and this is selfishly, I'm an avid hiker, and so of course we couldn't meet without talking about this. For those listening, Ken has just walked the Camino de Santiago, a pilgrimage trail through Spain and parts of Portugal. And I know that I wasn't necessarily going to bring this in, but you mentioned that you had some stories that you brought back.
Oh, I certainly have. I mean, this was for me a huge undertaking. So I turned 71 just recently, and I've never done anything like this before. But I had the opportunity to walk the French Camino, which is from across the French border, across the Pyrenees, 500 miles. So I really just wanted to be able to sing the Proclaimers song, "I will walk 500 miles," with an honest and open heart. But as it within Africa, when you do something like this, then stories kind of leap out at you.
Yeah.
And I mean, I had real hardship because I had a broken leg a few years ago, and in the early stages when we were climbing the Pyrenees, I had a lot of trouble with my left leg.
Yeah.
So, you know, through hardship, you learn a great deal about yourself. And, you know, I was faced with the prospect of possibly having to turn back, and I decided that would be too embarrassing.
Well, maybe.
I was being sponsored, and I for Sophie, and I raised £22,000.
Wow! Congratulations.
Through that, so I couldn't turn back, which
you couldn't. You're right.
but when one story which springs to mind is the story of a guy called Jimmy, who was an Irishman, and we were walking. This was quite early, and we were walking one of the worst parts of the Camino, which is coming downhill from the Pyrenees. A place called the Dragon's Teeth, and it's called the Dragon's Teeth because there's no road. It's more like rock climbing than hiking. And Jimmy was confessing his life. He talked rather a lot, and but he was fascinating. He had been an alcoholic. He had been verging on. He had been told by his wife that she was leaving him and taking the children, and he decided to go to Alcoholics Anonymous. So he was telling us this whole story, and we were on a bit of track that was almost hardly a track at all. And we turned a corner, and there in the middle of the track, and this is documented and on the Sophie site.
Okay.
There was a full keg of beer, one of these metal containers full of beer. Now, how it got there, the cars couldn't go in. I just do not know how. But we turned the corner just as Jimmy was telling us this horrendous story about his battle with alcoholism, and there was a keg of beer. And it seemed to have come by divine providence.
The law of attraction.
I have to say, Jimmy got so spooked that he just ran on ahead.
Yeah.
And we didn't see him again.
He's at the pub.
Which was rather sad. But we have there were various one thing I was particularly proud of. At the very first night, we were about 50 people all staying in the same albergue in a place called Orchestra, which is just up in the Pyrenees. And the host said we would go around the room and everybody would say who they were, where they had come from, and why they were walking the Camino.
Nice.
And so there were Italians, there were Latvians, there were Americans, Canadians, Australians. There were people from all over the place. A lot of French people, and I think, sort of in the first dozen people somewhere when they got to me, and I just, because I speak French, I decided I would do my introduction in French. And of course, the French people loved that. So I stood up and I told my story. You keep meeting people as you walk through 500 miles of the Camino. You keep meeting people that you knew at the beginning, and several people who were there I met up later, and they said, you're Ken, you're the guy who did his introduction in French. And then I met people along the track who said, oh, we've heard from somebody else about somebody who had done their introduction in French.
Not many old people on the trail, Ken. I think they've seen you coming, haven't they? You must be.
So I could go on all day, George, with stories from the Camino. It was a real challenge. It was a very tough thing to do. But I think that I don't want to be self-righteous, but it showed me that at 71, my life is not over. And it is actually worth taking on a big challenge. And if you set your mind to something, you can do it. And I think that's a lesson I hope, for life. I've had a wonderful, wonderful career in the for change sector. I thought it would be worth the kind of pain and suffering to do something like this, to show just that I could still do it. But I then surprised myself. I really enjoyed it. I loved the Spanish people. I loved the countryside we walked through. It was entertaining. It was fun. And as I said, I raised £22,000 for Sophie, which can't be bad.
Amazing.
So there we go, George. That was it.
There we go. So after saying we wouldn't go anywhere near an hour, we're of course over an hour, aren't we, Ken? But this is how it goes, and we've got some great stories to talk about.
I talk too much, George.
No, you talk more than enough. That's fine. It's been really lovely talking to you, Ken, and meeting you properly, actually, after working with you for a number of years. So you mentioned a few things. I just want to go back through just to make sure our listeners know. One of them, Mark Phillips, Blue Frog. Can you tell our listeners where they can find out about that?
Well, the Blue Frog Agency in London is, I think, one of the leading suppliers to the sector. Mark is the chief executive there. He heads it up, founder of Blue Frog.
Yeah.
They are. You will get them online. Queer Ideas is the name of Mark's blog. And I have no connection, there are other agencies that are available. I'm a great fan of Open Fundraising, who are the people who came up with the brilliant idea for I wish I'd thought of that series of which Sophie runs. Yeah. But I just think Mark and his colleagues have done a particularly valuable piece of work around the pandemic and donors' attitudes and thinking, and they're always surprising, surprising and perceptive, and they will tell you about great results that they had with their colleagues.
Sometimes you need to see that, don't you, as well, to have that confidence grow. That's a great one. And then another two you mentioned, the Gaping Void.
It's at Gaping Void. Hugh McLeod is the creative genius behind Gaping Void. I just think I get emails from them every now and then, and I've pinched more ideas from them than from most other sources.
Love it.
Just clever.
Love it. And then finally, the Sophie website, just want to read that out properly so people can just make sure.
Okay, so Sophie is the showcase of fundraising, innovation and inspiration. It's www.sophii.org.
Yeah.
And it's a treasure trove of free resources for campaigning fundraisers.
Absolutely. I can almost hear the keys getting tapped now, typing that in, sofii.org. Absolutely. Yeah. And then finally, Ken, yourself, do you wish to be contacted? And if you do, how would you like people to kind of follow you? And
I have a website, which is ken@kenburnett.com.
Yeah.
Well, actually, it's www.kenburnett.com.
Yeah.
And it's got details of my books. As I say, I've got a few copies of books left. I'm happy to hear from fundraisers, but I'm not working with clients anymore. I'm doing less and less seminars, and I'm more focusing on major undertakings and adventures like walking the Camino. But I'm always happy to hear from aspiring young people who want to change the world.
Amazing. So yeah, I've obviously been talking about storytelling can change the world a lot today, one of your books, and just pick up the other one as well, if you could. Yeah, absolutely. Campaigning, fundraising, the essence of campaigning, fundraising. And so these books are available through DSC, but they're available elsewhere as well. Ken, do you want to let people know?
Yeah, that's right. They can be ordered from whitelionpress.com or via my website, kenburnett.com.
Amazing. So thank you so much, Ken, and a really valuable talk there, and a really nice insight into one of the true experts of storytelling in our for change sector. I nearly said for-profit sector there. My brain was haunting me, wasn't it?
Well, in that sense, George, the profit that we get is priceless.
I take it. There we go. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, George.
Appreciate it. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you for watching Charity Questions by the Directory of Social Change. So this is the podcast where we bring charity experts to you and we ask them the questions that you provide us via social media. So if you want to get involved, please check out the Directory of Social Change on Instagram, Twitter or LinkedIn. And of course, to hear more about this content and to learn more about Charity Questions, subscribe to our YouTube channel now, and of course, like this video to let us know if you enjoyed it. Thank you very much for watching. Cheers.